Thank you. After that previous talk, I feel terrible. I'm an employee. We have a lot of policies at Warren and Mahoney, so I'm sure they'll be safe. Yes, I'm Ilona. I'm a senior architect at Warren and Mahoney. I've been there for 2 years. I've spent all of that 2 years working on the NZICC project with my principal, Richard Archbold, who I believe is on the flyers. He was supposed to be doing this talk. I'm obviously not Richard Archbold. He's unfortunately on leave and overseas and couldn't attend. He's been on this project for 5 years, so his knowledge and all the information he has about it is much, much, much deeper than mine, particularly with regards to the earlier stages of the project. So if you do have questions, particularly about the earlier parts of the project, I'll try my best to answer them. If I can't, I hope you'll forgive me for that. So the NZICC, or the New Zealand Convention Centre, for us, sorry, I'm technologically challenged too, so I'm hoping this all works quite well. For us, the New Zealand International Convention Centre represents 5 years of work. Warren and Mahoney have been involved for 5 years. It's a collaboration between 3 architectural practices. It's Warren and Mahoney as lead consultant, Mahler Architects, who of course have a long history of working with Sky City and have been involved on this particular project for longer than we have, and Woods Bagot, who are convention centre experts and have quite a few of them to their name in Australia but also overseas. The architectural package that we work on is just over actually 1,350 drawings, and what we're hoping that it will result in is a landmark Auckland project. So the NZICC, to just give you a summary of what it is, it's a big building and there's a lot of different spaces in it, but effectively it is the largest 3-story building you'll ever come across, and that's what it is. So there's the plenary space on top, the exhibition hall, and then level 1, which is the principal backup facilities that allow the building to function. So the plenary is more than an auditorium. At capacity, it'll seat 2,900 people, delegates. The idea of a plenary is a space that can be used like a very large auditorium for one big event, like big conference or a very, very big seminar, but has the capacity to be broken down to house a variety of functions, but also really flexible to change its size when necessary. It needs a lot of support facilities around it and all the breakout spaces, which we'll come to later on. The exhibition space is, the exhibition hall, as they call it, is about 8,500 square meters of space. It's a single space. What it requires is very, very large structural spans. The distance between the main columns in this room are 40 meters. It's got very high loadings on the floor to accommodate, again, a whole variety of functions like trade fairs, boat shows, and such events. And then, of course, underneath it all, on level 1, we've got a portion of the main entrance into the building, the main entrance into the car park under the building, and the primary backup facilities that help the building run. You've got a large truck dock. There's a very large commercial kitchen that Sky City Central will become Sky City's central kitchen, and plant rooms, switch rooms, all sorts of other facilities you need to keep the building going. So location-wise, it is bang in the middle of town. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. Bang in the middle of town. It's a big site. We've got Hobson Street to the east, Nelson Street to the west, Wellesley Street to the south of the site. On the north, this is the ADNZ building. We share a boundary line there. It is effectively a full city block. It's a prominent site. It's an important site. It's really centrally located. It's all about connections and how you get, and also what it can offer to the city when it's complete. So, as I said, we've been on this 5 years, but the history of the building goes back beyond that to work that was done by Mahler Architects, Gordon Mahler particularly. So his involvement with the project goes back further when a number of options design options were investigated for a convention centre for Auckland. The project has a very specific brief, and the idea was the idea of those studies was to see how that brief could be accommodated on various sites that had been nominated. So on this particular site, this is option 9. Option 9 was considered the starting point for the project, which showed how all the requirements of that quite challenging and complicated brief could be housed on the site that was nominated, the one on Hobson Street, between Hobson Street, Nelson Street, and Wellesley Street. So option 9 became the starting point. In this option, again, it's a large 3-story building with a lot of extra stuff stuck onto it. We had the plenary, but the plenary was down on level, well, we call it level 3, it's just third off the ground. Exhibition space was over the plenary. Underneath it, we had the truck docks and the service spaces and the car park underneath it. So this was really just an example of showing how everything could be fit on the site, and this option formed the basis of the agreement between the Crown and Sky City that started off the project. Now, before we put pen to paper and started working on that to see how we could actually get everything going, there was a number of project principles that were put into place. Now, I'm just going to quickly read over them, but it's good to remember these were put into place before we designed the building. I mean, I think if we read some of them out at the end of a project, they could sound a bit presumptuous at times, but we set them long before we did any design, and they've kept the process in check. So symbol and identity, the NZICC embodies what it means to be Kiwi and to live the New Zealand way. It captures the energy, confidence and creativity of its people. The NZICC is a powerful symbol for a change in Auckland and for New Zealand. Event experience. The NZICC is an event, a destination. Success and reputation are driven by the experience of the visitor, not the bricks and mortar. The NZICC experience is worth travelling for. It's an integral part of visiting Auckland and New Zealand. Values, benefits. The NZICC is about New Zealand, not just Auckland. The NZICC benefits everyone, citizens, visitors, businesses and customers. Alive and vibrant. The NZICC is part of the life and vibrant pulse of the city. The NZICC works long hours as an asset for New Zealand and Auckland. Integrated and interactive. The NZICC is woven into the city's fabric. The NZICC contributes to a coherent and considered plan for a beautiful, navigable and safe inner city. Positive growth. The NZICC positively affects the future of the city and offers accretive benefits for both Auckland and New Zealand. And as I said, we've revisited them right through the process, and we still do. And what's happened now, they've been taken on board by the people who are going to be operating the building and the branding of the building. And so that when you talk about a live or vibrant building, when you talk about integrated into the fabric of the city, that is carried through the operation of the building too. So the design process. As I said, we started with option 9, and then we started getting into the nitty-gritty of the building. One of the things that we had to face was the nature of seminars and conferences, and those kind of gatherings have changed. We use a whole range of media these days to get our message across to people. Very often they're not as formal as they used to be, and all of that, along with the technology that it comes to, had to be taken into consideration in the design. The spaces that house the events have changed a lot over the years, and we had to design something that could take a whole range of flexible spaces and activities within it. Again, it's a changing adaptability, changeability, being able to form gatherings very quickly and dismantle them. This is a shot of the Adelaide Convention Centre. This is the idea of the mobile auditorium, and it becomes the key to a lot of such facilities at the moment. The idea that you've got a set number of seats in a room is gone for this type of facility. Retractable seating is a must. You have to be able to pack the seating away. And when you're talking about a room this big with 2,900 seats or more, it needs really careful design. This is the Melbourne Convention Centre, and again, it's based on the same principles. And all of this had to be taken into consideration. Also, the other thing we had to keep in mind was the idea of a pop-up meeting rooms and pop-up activities. Again, the space had to be allowed for where they could be accommodated. The exhibition hall itself comes with its own very, very strict requirements. It's a very, very large space. It's 8,500 square meters. The loading for the floor is 15 kPa, which is far beyond the 3 to 5 kPa commercial work that we've done before this. The spans are massive, so you're talking about that kind of loading on the floor, and then we've got 40-meter spans between the main cruciform columns, 32 meters back here. This is a kind of space that, for example, if you're doing a boat show, trucks need to be drive into it, trailers bring very large items, and so it needs to have very good access. You need to be able to drive onto it. It also, for smaller events, because you want it to be usable and not use it just once a year, it has to have the ability to be split up into a whole variety of events and options. And each one comes with its own back-of-house requirements and services which need to be taken into consideration. The ceiling height in this space is 15 meters. There was a whole range of mode, and this is where the Woods Bagot colleagues came into play, because being convention centre experts, they knew how these spaces would be used. So, and of course we had the brief which we had to follow. So there's a whole range of modes that need to be considered of how this space is going to be used, how it could possibly be used, and each one of these comes with its own fire requirements, acoustic requirements, servicing, back-of-house catering requirements, which have to be incorporated into the design. This was all sorts of seating, considering boxing events, concerts, banquets, a theatre possibly, catwalks, fashion shows, and the same applied to the plenary too. So the plenary, as I said, takes just under 3,000 people at full capacity, but it has the ability to be split up into a variety of modes, and again, for a variety of events taking place. Some of them will need their own independent stages, so it needed to be taken into consideration. And of course we had the basics of design, like sight lines and the theatre design, heights. Access was a big issue. Getting into the space, so getting into the truck dock. We've got 3 very big roads, important roads around the site: Hobson Street, Nelson Street, Wellesley Street, deciding how you come onto the site, how you access the site, and also get into the truck dock, but also accessing the car park that sits underneath the building. And the other one was looking at option 9, where the exhibition hall was up at the top of the building. One of the issues we had was, how do you get a truck up there? Can you ramp? It's pretty long ramp. So all of these started feeding into the design and moving things around. This is about facades. Facades was a big part of this design. As I said, we're filling a city block. Because we were following a very specific brief, we had the luxury of not having to fill the site. Usually when you're doing a commercial project, you have to make the most of the site, you fill it, you end up with these very big buildings. With this one, once we met the brief, we had the luxury of being able to pull parts of the building back and break it down. And that was really important when you consider the size of the building and how it's going to interact with the city around it. So a very, very big number of facade studies were done at the time. So that work resulted in 12 options 1 to 12, and option 7 was approved and considered the basis of the concept design at the time. This was quite a quick process getting to here, quite intensive. So the concept design was based on option 7, which was taken on board at the time. So option 7, things had moved around a bit. Plenary had gone right up to the top of the building. The exhibition hall sat underneath it. The truck dock was down on level 1, so you could access it. Car park was still underneath. Other things had come out to play. There was a space highlighted. At the time, it was for future development, but that's where the hotel is going. And so I'm not going to talk about this. It'd be great if you could get Gordon Muller here to talk about the hotel. And also, there was Nelson House, which is sitting on the side. This is the Albion. This is not part of the development. It's got heritage value, but it's not part of the development. It sits separately. and of course the site itself. There was an opportunity to start carving a laneway to the north of the project where you could link Nelson Street and Hobson Street together. So these things started taking shape, but the size and the location of the main elements was set. One of the things that I'd like to point out is convention centres traditionally sit on the outskirts of cities, and they're outside the immediate urban fabric because of the amount of area that they cover. So very often you visit convention centres and they're sprawled out on the fringes of a city. The different functions, because of their requirements, sit next to each other. Another feature they have is there's an approach side and an entrance, but all other elevations turn the back onto the city, and they're usually blank facades that don't interact with the urban environment behind them. And in some cases, because they're on the fringes, they don't feel they need to. What we were doing here is actually quite unique, and there's not many buildings like this built. We're stacking all these functions. So we decided we have a very big space with 15-meter high ceiling, and we didn't want columns in it, so we wanted very large structural spans, and then we decided to put a 3,000-seat plenary on top of it. So in that context, the relationship between the architect and the structural engineers becomes really, really important. And if you can't see eye to eye, you're not going to. So this is a stereotypical relationship between, or that's what people think is the relationship between architects and structural engineers. So we had to change that very quickly. Or this is another one. It doesn't fit in with the vocabulary of the building. So we did, the structural engineers are BICA, and they got on board very, very quickly. And it's a fundamental part of this design and how far we've got. There's 8,500 tons of steel in this building. And if you drive past, you can see most of it now. The facade hasn't gone up yet, so it's extraordinary when you look up and you can see the sides of some of the trusses up there. Whoops. This is one of the trusses. This is one of the first prototypes they did. This was in Thailand where they assembled it. That's the team that did the work. And this was, the main idea was these are the cruciform columns in the exhibition hall, and they've got these mighty connections on top because they're taking trusses in all directions to be able to form a platform on top of the exhibition hall so we can put the plenary on top of it. And this was the first prototype they did and sent us a photo. These were pieces of trusses being loaded onto the tanker, being shipped over to New Zealand. It's a 4.5 meter truss zone, and you can see the size of the people next to the trusses themselves. These are all up at the moment.
Any reason why they were built over there?
I think they couldn't do them here. It was time, it was program, it's the usual cost, program, and then the ability for this amount in that period of time, and cost, of course, I'm sure. Sorry?
They built by the shipyard?
I don't know. I didn't actually go. The structural engineers went to see. We couldn't go. The relationship didn't go that far. The other thing that we had taken into consideration was Nelson House. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Nelson House. So Nelson House was part of the site, and this is pre my time, unfortunately, but a lot of studies were done on Nelson House and the heritage value of keeping the building or how much of the building could be maintained. Dave Pearson Architects are our heritage consultants on the project. So quite a while back, the decision was made that the facade would be preserved and that a lot of the fabric of the inside of the building had actually changed throughout time over the years. So we decided to keep the facade, but one of the conditions was that when we build around the facade, we don't want it to get lost in the bulk of this massive building going around it. And it's important that the building can step back and let Nelson House be recognized in the size and scale that it originally existed. Linking into the grid that Nelson House had was, again, a challenge because we had this is the exhibition hall. The exhibition hall on Hobson Street has to link to the street, so you can drive trucks onto it. But on this side, it had to come and meet Nelson House in a meaningful location, and also the floors below it, so it had to be incorporated. We wanted it to be very much part of the complex, and people who come in can see it and appreciate it. And this is one of the earlier sketches done to show that's just the exhibition hall. So when you come into the exhibition hall, this is very much part of that space and not a secondary space. So the design, by this stage, we'd kind of developed design. As I said, most of the building had been set. We knew what we were doing. As you know, it's 32,500 square meters, but 32,500 square meters of usable space, of publicly accessed space. There's another 40,000 square meters of car park underneath it, and there's a whole heap of other spaces too. The capacity is 4,000 people for one-off event. As I said, the theatre sits 2,900 people. There's 33 meeting spaces, and these are large meeting spaces that can be divided and spread across. Because part of the brief was that, you need to be able to allow for events, different events happening at the same time, and at times delegates not mixing or meeting each other, so you have to be able to get people in and out of the building separately. So here we are. This is very much kind of where we are now. That's NZICC. That's Hobson Street, Wellesley Street, Nelson Street. That's TVNZ. That's the hotel and the highlight of the hotel. The outline of the hotel. Part of this complex is also two bridges, which are part of our contract and our design. This is the Hobson Street Bridge, which is going to link the hotel to Sky City's main site complex. And there's a little, what we call the laneway bridge. It's actually not that little. That links the hotel to the convention centre, so that the whole Sky City complex is connected right through with the pedestrian bridges. You can also see, so the facade of Nelson House sits here. That's the Albion, which exists, which was maintained and was still there and in operation. And as I said, there was an opportunity to carve a laneway, a pedestrian laneway that goes up from Nelson Street. You can walk, because these two streets have quite a big level difference, so you can walk right down through it. This area of the building was considered the sort of central circulation, and we called it the Spine Gallery. So, developed design, we had a whole heap of other secondary little spaces. Everything was kind of set in its place. We've got plant rooms, toilets, service spaces, storage, offices, because of course the building to operate has staff and has offices. They all took shape. So this is level 1, and you can kind of see the kitchen. This is the main kitchen space. This is the truck dock, and the truck dock is dividable. It's for different events, different products coming in. There's a whole heap of storage down here, which feed the kitchen. Up here, this is one of the entrances into the Spine Gallery, and the Spine Gallery also links as you go up the levels to Hobson Street. So this becomes the main circulation spine for the building. This is the exhibition hall and some of the secondary spaces that sit around it. That's the Spine Gallery. You can see it up here. And there's another entrance. So that's the level 3. That's the main entrance of Hobson Street coming into the building. This is the Wellesley Gallery, which when you look at it on plan, you think it's quite a small space. You could comfortably hold an entire wedding in that. You can actually get a sense of that space. That space is almost finished on site. So it's one of the prominent areas that can be, again, hold its own event. And that's the plenary on top of the building. So that's the plenary itself, but it's surrounded by a very large body of spaces. Some are permanently divided into meeting spaces, and some have a whole heap of operable walls which can be split up into different meeting spaces, and again they come with their own fire and acoustic ratings and conditions and servicing, but the idea was that we didn't want the building to turn us back to the city, so we've allowed spaces that sit around here that can activate the facades, and you'll see that in some of the images. That's just a typical car park. So 4 levels of car park underneath, and that's just the plan. These are just shots from our model, the Revit model. So that's the level 1, that's level 3. Again, you can see the exhibition hall, and you can see this is the Spine Gallery taking shape. That's the wall of the Spine Gallery. We'll talk about it later. And this is just a cut through the laneway as you go up. This has got retail and food and beverage facilities along it to just keep it alive. This is level 5. So by this stage, you can see the wall of the Spine Gallery here. This is all clad in terracotta, and you can see the facade. That's Nelson House sitting on the corner. We're on Nelson Street. So this is one of the earlier shots, one of the earlier renders of the project. So I'm standing with my back towards Sky City on Hobson Street. The footpath around here is going to be widened. It's part of the plan to accommodate. So because this is the face of the exhibition hall, and you have to have enough pedestrian space in front of this building. This is the laneway that will link the two buildings. That's the hotel. You can see just the end of the hotel there. This is the spine gallery wall, which is clad in terracotta. This is the facade around the space around the plenary. So it's effectively the plenary facade, and it's all glazed. This is another shot further down. Bit of quality too. That's the hotel. So you actually can only see NZICC in the background there, but you can get a sense of that's the exhibition hall. This is the Hobson Street Bridge. So this is the bridge that's going to link the hotel to Sky City main site as part of this contract. This is a spine gallery. So this is the main circulation that's going to tie all these spaces together. And the idea was that it has to be big enough to house the delegates. People need to be able to move through it freely. You need to be able to get people going to different events in and out of the space without crossing each other necessarily. A lot of work. It has to be alive and vibrant. You don't want it to just be like long corridors. And there was a lot of work went into breaking down the space because, of course, we were dealing with really, really high ceiling heights. And the choice of material, because, again, this was all part of, this is New Zealand. It's about New Zealand. We have to try and showcase New Zealand products and the look and feel of what we would expect it to be, and also a lot of natural products. So there's a lot of timber, there's a lot of stone, there is a lot of blackened steel. So the idea is to keep it a natural palette. This is just a typical shot of what the exhibition hall at full capacity could be used for. So it's just an example of a boat show, and you can see the technical grid that sits above this. I said 14-meter high ceiling height. This is one of the spaces to the side of the plenary, which actually overlooks the city. You can actually stand on the slab now and see what the views are going to be like. So that's overlooking the harbour. And the idea is that these spaces can, again, be divided up or put together to house a whole range of activities. This is a very early render. I'm standing with my back to City Works Depot and looking. So that's Nelson House, the building sitting around it. That's well as the gallery I was talking about there. You can just about see the plenary box up there. And down here is the entrance into the car park where you drive down Nelson Street. So just if you remember the site before any of this were done, I've got some shots later on. It used to be a multitude of properties, each with their own crossing across the street, and all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So now the building is taking up the entire site. You know, the idea was to rationalize all these crossings. That's the main car entrance into the complex. One of the principles was that we needed to keep all the facades activated, and the idea is that you allow uses around them that can be ongoing, not one-offs, or have the possibility of splitting the space to, say, allow for a pop-up market or something in that space. This is the laneway that runs down between TVNZ and the hotel and NZICC, and that's just where the spine gallery sits. And the spine gallery, again, has access to both sides, so it is a way through the city. So in the New Zealand identity and art was a big part of this project right from day one. And it needed to demonstrate what it means to be here in New Zealand and from here. And a lot of work went into that. The idea was that the building would be designed in a way that could showcase New Zealand art at its best. Delegates coming to a, say, conference to this building, this might be their only experience of Auckland and New Zealand. They get on a plane, come here in a taxi, go to the building, it's 3 days in a conference, stay in the local hotel, back in the taxi, off they go. They never see anything else. They might walk around a bit. So what the building needed to demonstrate, the idea was that whatever they experience will go far beyond the city of Auckland, and we needed to take that into consideration. So right at the beginning, the decision was that we didn't want to just create a platform where you could, say, put a few beautiful sculptures and paintings, but that the art could be woven into the fabric of the building itself. and that it could be part of the architecture. So there was two areas that were considered quite early on. One was the glazing around the plenary, because there's a lot of it and it goes right around the building, and the other was the wall of the spine gallery, which is clad in terracotta. And an opportunity came up to allow for artists to put their work on these two. I'll let the artists speak for themselves. If you bear with me while I find my video.
Any artwork, it's really important to start with an authentic experience. And so when I was asked to create this work, I was asked to consider...
Sorry, before I go on. The two artists are Sarah Hughes and Piata Larkin. So Sarah Hughes' work is the glass work to the top of the building on the glazing around the plenary, and Piata Larkin's artwork is on the spine gallery wall.
How could I convey a sense of being in New Zealand to international visitors and people that live in Auckland and the wider New Zealand?
Several major aspects of the building's fabric which were identified as places where artists would later come and lay their work, and the two primary areas for that were the terracotta spine wall, which stretches about 120 metres right through the entire block. And the other one is the kind of glass shroud which surrounds the top floor, which is the plenary hall.
So for me, I suppose I was thinking about how I could enhance the architecture, how could I play with the architecture. So then I thought, okay, there is this long wall, I want to soften it. And so my idea with the pattern was to make it like it was moving, a moving pattern, an undulated pattern that gave you the sense of three-dimensionality, in that flat surface.
I was really taken when the architect talked about the building being like a lighthouse that sits on the top, and so for me that feeling of the bottom of the forest looking up through the trees and the canopy.
So delegates will enter and they won't forget, am I in Australia, am I in North America? No, I'm very much in New Zealand, and only could I have this experience in New Zealand. So I think a good example of the things that we're trying to do to make us stand out in the international marketplace.
So that's the NZICC video. Sorry, I'll just get this back up. There we are. So I said, Sarah Hughes' work is the panels. There's about 2,400 square metres of glass on the top of the building. It's about 550 panels. And her artwork is basically baked onto these pieces of sheet. Some of them are flat panels on the window itself, and there's a large number of panels that sit outside, like wings. Piata's work is about 13,500 terracotta tiles in 8 colours, and an enormous amount of work went into prototyping the tiles, checking them, as they did with the glass panels, to understand how they could go together, how something that had been drawn as an artwork could be changed to this scale. As Andrew said in the video, the wall is about 110 metres long and spans the entire height of the building. And these are the fins, as you can see. That's another shot looking back from the air bridge, so from the Hobson Street air bridge looking back onto the building. This was some of the prototyping, then the work that was done on the terracotta tiles to make sure the shades were right and they created the pattern needed. So then we got into, this is the timeline for the documentation. This is a real snapshot of the timeline. It was a bit more complicated than this. But we basically, concept design master planning was done in 2013. Preliminary design and first application of the resource consent was in 2014. Generally, not quite as clear cut as that. Developed, design and updated resource consent application 2015. Car park detailed design, because this was accelerated. So we were told that the car park had to be delivered. It's a separate portion of work that had to be finished early and delivered. So that took place in sort of mid-2015. And we were novated to the contract as it's a novation contract to Fletcher's in November 2015. And construction began almost immediately. There was a lot of excavation and demolition to take place. Detailed design, in 2016 approximately, but there was various packages that continued beyond this date, and building consent starting back in 2016, apart from the structural works and the demolition works that had been done much earlier, and it's a stage consent, and parts of it are still ongoing. So again, detailed design, there's more detail on our drawings now. Dimensions set out, we're getting into the more construction side of things. A lot of scheduling done, a lot of numbers and calculations. This is just a typical car park. This is the entry, and I'll show you a snapshot later on. And on the site, on the existing site before we even started, there's a roadway that comes off Nelson Street. You drive down through the site, go underground, through a tunnel under Hobson Street and goes into Sky City. Many of you may have driven through it. It's actually one of the access points into Sky City car park. One of the conditions of the contract was that road be maintained right throughout construction. So there's a short period of time where it could be stopped and sort of shut down for a few months while a secondary road was built, but access through the site into the Sky City car park has been maintained throughout. This is level 1. These are just examples of our drawings, and these are GA, so we really had to think long and hard about how we were going to fit this on the site. Another thing that we had to keep in mind was this is a transmission shaft for TVNZ, which cannot be interfered with, whether during construction or in the design of the building. It had to be taken into careful consideration. So it is modeled in Revit. We use Revit. All the consultants use Revit. But the basis, our agreement, the basis of our construction documentation are still 2D drawings. So we don't build off the model. So we had to think about how we could get what was the correct scale for the drawings, and we had to plan the drawing set quite early on and in a lot of detail. The different spaces, the different levels, the way the levels link to each other caused us complications. But the facades were probably one of the most difficult bits that we had to document, because we've got a lot of breaks in the facade. They move, they change material. There's a lot of junctions. And we had to be able to show those junctions and show the intricacies quite quickly. We do use a lot of, that's a render, so we just use a part of render, but in our documentation we do use a lot of 3D shots out of the pure Revit model, and these are some of the examples. So when we get to a trickier junction, it's just the easiest way to get the message across to the contractors of what's going on there. It is a BIM project, so we have a BIM deliverable, which means we have quite a high level of detailing in our model, and we use a lot of that model in our documentation. Mock-ups and prototyping. Again, this was a long process. In some cases, it's still ongoing. This was the facade. A lot of glass on this building. We had to do mock-ups and do a lot of studies, both in terms of the visual look of the glass, what color is the glass going to look like, also the performance of the glass. And then to further challenge that, there was the fact that there's a lot of light that goes in the glass and how the glass was going to react with that light, which is part of the activity of the facade, and then the artwork that goes on top and some of the glass. So we got into the building side of things. Now, when I started on this project, which was way earlier than this, but we were digging a hole in the ground. It's the largest hole in the ground I have ever seen. So this is September. These are just the shots that we had from a camera. This is the road I was talking about that used to go through the site. At this stage, you can see Nelson House is gone. The facade has been propped up, and there's a gantry on the outside that protects it. A lot of focus on the hotel site here, because that was going to start further on, and just general excavation and demolition. By November, a lot of the demolition is complete. We're excavating, we're still going down here. The first crane went up, which was the crane that was going to serve the hotel site. You can see the start of a temporary road that was going to go in. We had shut down the road in the middle of the site, and this was until the temporary road got built. Temporary road is in place. Second crane went up. We got to the bottom of level 4, which is as far as we were going to go. So the decision was that the excavation was centered on this side. We'd take more of this side, start building until we could start working on the other side of the site. Demolition on this side couldn't take place because the temporary road was there. So Fletcher's had to do some very, very careful staging of the construction. Next two cranes are up by this stage, and we've started building the car park from this corner, as you see, while we're still digging the ground on this other end. Car park was started advancing really, really quickly. It was pretty simple steel structure, comb floor for the floors, and you can see the foundations and the core of the hotel going up quite quickly. So this is April 2017. Car park very well progressed. Parts of the upper parts of the building are also coming up. This is our regular. We get these shots now. It's drone photography, and they take these monthly now. So you can see Nelson House is all propped up here. The car park is effectively, the structure of this portion of it is complete. This road is still in operation, which means we can't really do much on that side of the site. Hotel is growing out of the ground. We've got 5 cranes on site, and we've started building some of the upper parts of the building. August 2017, you can see these are the big columns, so they're going up at big speed. We were waiting to see the trusses. We were hoping to be able to see some of the trusses go up. This is the structure of level 3, the big exhibition hall. So the trusses started going up, but they started putting them up in the middle of the night, so we missed it. This was September 2017. It was amazing how they had to do them, because of course you can imagine on that road with Nelson Street working and Hobson Street, lifting these trusses and putting them into site was quite an operation. The gantry is still on Nelson House, as you can see. But this road, so what happened as the car park got complete, we opened the permanent road into the car park, and this temporary road was decommissioned, which allowed works to begin on that end of the site. This is the roof above so the truss zone is all complete. You can see some of the trusses down at the back here. The roof has started going up, so this is the floor that's going to take the plenary. There are the columns of the plenary going up and the floor being poured. The Nelson House gantry was removed. It didn't need, because the floors were all in, we could tie the facade back to the slabs, so there was no need for that protection there, and that came down. And this is just getting into this year, so you can see the structure of the plenary going up, the columns, and I think this is when they started forming the roof of the plenary. So this is the roof of the large auditorium, more trusses, and the last one I believe is June, which is the roof of the plenary box is going up. This roof is now complete. So the facade will start going up in a few months' time. Sarah Hughes's work will be going up later this year, and Piata Larkin's work will be going up early next year, the terracotta tiles. So, sorry, we just have one more. I have to apologize for the music on this. It is horrendous. It's not very up to date, but it gives you an idea of how quickly some of the things started moving. So effectively, that's the NZICC. Thank you.
Have we got any questions? Must be, surely.
You now talk about politics and cost. When is that due to open?
The completion date is December next year, 2019. The building will be complete mid next year. There's an awful lot of finishing. You can just imagine what the snagging of this building is going to be like. And commissioning, because the technology and the servicing of the building is a massive part of it. I mean, the architecture is probably not the most complicated. So we're hoping that once the facades go up, you'll see what it looks like. Once the artwork goes up, you get a better picture of that. By mid next year, the building should be there complete, but it opens end of next year.
Are all the drawings done in-house at Warren and Mahoney?
Yeah. We did one portion of the car park drawings when it got fast-tracked. It was outsourced to draftspeople. We had to outsource it. We just couldn't do it. But everything else since that is in-house. Yes.
So how many people are working on the drawings?
All of us work on the drawings.
Yeah.
I work in Revit. We all do. We have the team at the moment is about 12 of us full time. So I've got my principal and me and another 11 people full time on this. Most do draw, but that's a combination. So we've got one full time from Woods Bagot. We've got 3 full time from Moller Architects who are based in our offices and have been for 2 years. And the rest of us at Warren and Mahoney. But we're also in ops, so we're also doing site observations at the same time. So it's pretty full on.
Huge scale, isn't it? Huge scale.
It is.
And how you can get all you guys are all working on the same project and not getting confused and
Well, we do get confused. We do, of course it does.
Someone's done that, and why have they done that?
The nature of what we do is the same. There's just a lot more of it.
Yeah.
You know, as I said, my husband's an architectural designer and he does residential work. But he complains about the same stuff I complain about. There's just more of it. That's all.
Excellent. Oh, very, very good. Thank you very much.
That's
very
okay.
interesting.
Thank you.